The sun hung low over the Kansas plains as the military truck rolled through the final stretch of dusty road leading to Camp Silver Creek. Inside the enclosed compartment, silence reigned. 30 German women, all prisoners of war, sat packed shoulder to shoulder, their eyes hollow, their hands clenched tightly in their laps. The stench of sweat, fear, and worn wool filled the air. Most of them had not spoken for hours, not since sunrise, when the convoy began its journey from the temporary transit camp.
Among the women sat Helga, a former midwife from Hamburg. Her once steady hands now trembled slightly, not from age, but from months of trauma. She had survived the Allied bombings, the chaos of surrender, and the humiliating process of forced relocation. On her left sat Anna-Mani, the oldest among them, a former librarian with pale skin and a habit of counting things silently under her breath. Beside her, barely more than a child, sat Liesel, just 18, clutching a rolled-up woolen shawl like a lifeline.
They had heard rumors, most of them terrifying. Stories passed in whispers of Americans who starved prisoners, who punished women with silence and cold, who used them as leverage for intelligence. The word interrogation loomed in every fearful mind. They had seen the worst of war and no longer believed in the possibility of kindness. For them, survival meant suspicion. Hope was something dangerous, something that had already betrayed them many times. As the truck slowed to a stop, the wheels crunching over gravel, every heartbeat quickened. The heavy metal latch creaked. Then the rear doors swung open, flooding the compartment with blinding afternoon light. The women squinted instinctively, shielding their eyes with their hands. No shouts came, no orders barked. Instead, a calm American soldier extended a hand and simply said, "Ladies, welcome." The words were translated quickly by a civilian interpreter, but even before the meaning was understood, the tone registered, polite, almost gentle. They stepped down one by one, boots hitting the ground with hesitant purpose. The camp before them looked nothing like the barracks they had imagined. Neat gravel paths separated long wooden buildings with windows and clean roofs. There were no barking dogs, no watchtowers looming overhead. Instead, flower beds lined the edges of the walkway, their late autumn blooms defiantly colorful. Liesel nearly tripped, staring at them, unable to reconcile the sight with everything she had been told. They were led not to a cell, but to what appeared to be a sanitation building. The moment the door opened, a smell hit them, foreign, overwhelming, almost painful. Soap, real soap, the kind that lathered and clung to skin, with floral perfume and warmth. Each woman was issued a clean towel, a bar of soap, a washcloth, and a simple cotton nightdress. Helga froze in place, the towel clutched in her hands. Her legs refused to move. Her mind screamed, "This is a trap." Anna-Marie whispered, "They want us clean before they break us." But her voice lacked conviction. Even her suspicion was tinged with confusion. Inside, rows of showers steamed softly behind privacy curtains. A female officer stood at the far end of the room, not watching, but waiting. Her face was calm, professional. "Take your time," the interpreter said. "You'll have hot water, then dinner, then bed." For the first time in months, Helga felt something she couldn't name. Not trust, not safety, but the slight loosening of the knot in her chest. She stepped forward, towel in hand, toward the unfamiliar promise of warmth and soap. Behind her, Liesel followed, eyes wide with silent awe. No one spoke. They walked as if afraid the spell might break. That night, as the women were assigned beds with clean sheets and folded blankets, no one slept easily. The beds were too soft, the room too quiet. The smell of soap clung to their skin like a second conscience. For women who had been stripped of every form of comfort and control, the return of hygiene felt almost like a threat. What kind of enemy gives you hot water and towels, and what will they want in return? The first showers took place that evening. One by one, the women were led into the wash-house, their expressions unreadable, their bodies tense with anticipation. The room was warm and filled with the sound of running water. Steam curled in the air like ghosts from another world. Each prisoner was handed a clean towel and directed to a private stall. No guards barked orders. No one rushed them. Helga was among the first. She stood at the edge of the tiled floor, unsure whether to step forward. Her last memory of a shower involved a freezing pipe in an unlit room and 30 women packed like cattle. But here the water ran clean and hot, without pressure or humiliation. The soap foamed in her hands with a gentle lavender scent. Her body flinched instinctively, then slowly began to relax under the stream. For several minutes she simply stood motionless, as if absorbing more than just heat. Liesel, watching from the bench, felt paralyzed. Her feet were black with dirt, and her hair matted from weeks of neglect. She didn't believe this was safe. Warm water was suspicious. Soap was a lie. But the smell alone awakened something deep and almost forgotten. Memories of home, of her mother washing linens in the kitchen sink, of Sundays and clean dresses. That association nearly made her cry. Anna Marie was the last to enter the stall. Her hands trembled so severely that she dropped the soap. She couldn't bring herself to stand under the water. For her, steam and silence echoed the terrifying rumors of gas chambers. She closed her eyes and counted silently, willing her body to cooperate. Eventually, with effort, she let the water touch her skin. Her breath came in short, frightened bursts, but no horror followed, only warmth. When the women returned to the barracks, the change was visible. Their hair was no longer dull. Their faces looked softer, younger. Skin once caked with grime now held a hint of color. But more than the physical transformation, there was a subtle shift in posture. They walked more upright, with shoulders no longer permanently hunched in defense. They looked at each other with a shared question. Why were they being treated this way? A soft silence lingered in the room as they lay on clean sheets, their damp hair spreading over the pillows. They didn't speak about the showers, as if saying it aloud might take the magic away. For women accustomed to survival through control and caution, this act of care felt too intimate, too risky. Trust, even in hot water, came slowly. But something had shifted. The next morning, fresh towels were stacked neatly by the door. A basin with warm water stood ready for washing. The routine was repeated with quiet precision. No one told them to be grateful. No one explained why. But their bodies, cleansed and warm, began to believe they might not be punished for being clean. This was a new kind of captivity, one that replaced cold with comfort, and that confused them more than any cruelty could. Helga brushed her hair for the first time in weeks, her fingers fumbling over tangled strands. The sensation of doing something so ordinary brought a strange ache to her chest. She wasn't just maintaining hygiene, she was reclaiming fragments of her former self. In the mirror, she almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. By the end of the second day, even Anna Marie had developed a ritual: heating water, wiping her arms, cleaning under her fingernails. She did it in silence, still suspicious, but consistent. Liesel hummed under her breath while drying her hair with the same towel she had clutched like a shield just days earlier. The towel now felt like armor of a different kind, something protective and personal. It was not yet peace, and certainly not freedom. But cleanliness began to act like a quiet rebellion against war, against what they had become,
against the belief that they were no longer women, but things. Every drop of hot water, every folded towel was a reminder. Their bodies still mattered. They still existed beyond uniform and number. By the start of the third week, the routines had become strangely comforting. Each morning began with a folded towel placed neatly at the foot of every cot. A basin of warm water awaited those who preferred not to queue at the communal showers. The smell of soap, once an alarming novelty, now blended into the background like the scent of dry wood or morning air. It was no longer shocking, but it hadn't yet become trusted. Anna Marie remained the most skeptical. Though she participated in the hygiene rituals, her movements were mechanical, her eyes always watching. She wiped her face and hands methodically, but never lingered, never seemed to enjoy it. She saw the towels not as gifts, but as bait. Her war-hardened instincts told her that anything freely given must eventually come with a cost. Helga, on the other hand, was beginning to rediscover herself through the daily rhythms. She started trimming her nails, braiding her hair, even requesting a second washcloth to clean her feet before bed. The nurse in her reawakened. She assisted others, gently washing a wound here, offering advice on rashes there. In the quiet, sterile moments of cleansing, her identity slowly reassembled, piece by piece. Liesel found herself gravitating toward the younger guards during these moments. One in particular, a boyish corporal named Ray, always offered a polite nod when delivering the new batch of linens. He never spoke much, but once he smiled and mimed a thumbs up when she handed him a used towel folded perfectly. That small moment felt like a bridge, brief, harmless, and yet dangerously human. Despite the fragile trust forming between some of the women and the camp routines, the unease never fully disappeared. On the fourth Friday, something subtle changed. The towels were late. The water ran cold for several hours. A rumor spread, a supply delay. But for many of the women, the delay ignited old fears. Liesel didn't say anything aloud, but she stared at her hands for a long time that morning, as if wondering how much dirt it would take to erase the softness she'd regained. In the mess hall that evening, the conversation was quieter than usual. No one mentioned the towels, but everyone thought about them. Would the Americans take away the small kindnesses as easily as they had offered them? Anna Marie muttered to Helga in German, "This is the start of the turn." Helga didn't answer. She understood too well how quickly mercy could reverse into punishment. But the next morning, the towels returned. Warmer than usual, a different batch, perhaps sent from a civilian town nearby. Alongside them, bars of soap wrapped in paper that read, "For sensitive skin." That detail, small and strange, left many women speechless. Who decided prisoners deserved such consideration? It made the kindness feel almost unbearable. That day, something shifted in Anna Marie. She still washed quickly, but as she passed Liesel, she placed her own towel, a freshly warmed one, into the girl's hands and whispered, "Take the soft one today. You're young. You should remember what soft feels like." It was the first time she had spoken without cynicism since their arrival. Even so, doubt lingered. The women had been prisoners in too many places, seen too many uniforms, heard too many speeches about dignity and rules. They had learned that comfort could be a strategy, that warmth could precede cruelty. So each towel they received was accepted with a kind of reverence, but also with fear. In the evenings, Helga began writing invisible letters in her head, messages to a daughter she hadn't seen in years. In these imagined notes, she described the scent of the lavender soap, the way warm towels felt against clean skin, the shock of finding kindness in captivity. She never wrote them down, but as she washed her hands each night, she remembered the words.
as if the water could carry them across an ocean of silence. The arrival of the military delegation shattered the camp's fragile sense of stability. One morning, a convoy of jeeps pulled into the compound, tires grinding over gravel like the prelude to judgment. Officers in pressed uniforms stepped out, their faces carved from discipline and suspicion. Among them was Colonel Dawes, known in other camps for his belief in tactical pressure over humanitarian leniency. His eyes scanned the grounds with visible contempt, as if every flower bed and clean window were an insult to military order. Rumors spread fast. Some said the camp was under review. Others whispered about intelligence failures, or that prisoners were being coddled instead of interrogated. The guards became noticeably more rigid in their posture, their jokes disappeared, their movements clipped and efficient. Women noticed fewer smiles, fewer small gestures of kindness. Even the tone of morning announcements changed, less casual, more formal, like a warning. Colonel Dawes met with Captain Eleanor Rose behind closed doors, but voices leaked through walls not built for secrets. He demanded productivity, names, affiliations, intelligence. He saw clean towels and hot water as distractions, not tools. He questioned why prisoners were permitted to maintain a sense of normalcy. "Clean women don't confess," he reportedly said, a phrase that made its way around the compound with eerie speed. Captain Rose tried to defend the system she had built. She spoke of order, of morale, of how hygiene had reduced illness and violence within the camp. But her words fell against stone. Dawes wasn't interested in wellness. He wanted leverage. He wanted broken spirits and desperate cooperation. To him, the clean beds and lavender soap represented a failure to extract value from enemy bodies. By the second day of the visit, small changes were felt across the camp. The soap allotments were reduced. Water was rationed for 20 minutes in the morning and 20 in the evening. Towels were collected sooner and replaced with thinner, rougher ones. Some prisoners assumed it was temporary, logistical. Others knew better. They had seen how erosion begins, not with force, but with subtraction. Liesel reacted the fastest. She stopped brushing her hair. She sat further from the guards during roll call. The warmth in her eyes faded. The routines that had begun to restore her now felt like a betrayal. She had believed for a moment that soap could be a promise, but now she saw it as a trick, bait for trust. And trust, she had learned, was always punished. Anne-Marie responded with quiet anger. She performed every duty with meticulous discipline, but spoke to no one. She washed her hands with cold water, even when warm was available. When another woman asked her why, she simply said, "I won't owe them softness." The sentence struck Helga deeply. She understood it wasn't about the water, it was about control, about refusing to be molded by mercy. Helga found herself caught between two instincts. The nurse in her wanted to fight for dignity, to keep reminding others of its worth. But the prisoner in her knew that dignity without power was dangerous. She noticed Captain Rose walking the grounds more often, alone, slower than usual. Her eyes were tired. Her posture no longer radiated command, but worry. One afternoon, the showers ran cold again. No explanation, no apology. That night, Helga couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her cot, holding a dry washcloth in her lap. It smelled faintly of soap, and for some reason, that made her chest ache more than it had during any beating or hunger. Cleanliness had become more than survival. It had become a language, and now that language was being silenced. As the delegation prepared to leave, Dawes gave a speech to the guards. "This is a prison, not a hotel," he said. His words weren't directed at the women, but they felt them anyway. When he departed, the dust from his tires lingered in the air like smoke. That night, no towels were delivered. The women went to sleep with damp hair and no explanation. The morning after the delegation's departure was unusually quiet. The women awoke expecting the return of normalcy, the restoration of towels, soap, warm water, but found only more absence. The wash basins were empty. The showers remained locked. A single guard handed out thin paper napkins and muttered that supplies had been redirected. No explanation followed, and none was demanded. Silence became easier than disappointment. Liesel sat on the edge of her cot, staring at her hands. Dirt had begun to settle under her fingernails again. Her hair was tangled from sleep. The softness she had worked so hard to maintain dissolving faster than she expected. She tried not to care, but she did. She missed the warmth, the smell, the routine, and she missed who she had felt herself becoming, someone human again. Anna Marie didn't speak all morning. Instead, she pulled out her worn journal and began to write. No one asked what she recorded. They all knew it wasn't facts or dates. It was memory, evidence of what had been offered and taken away. Clean water, towels, the privilege of touch without harm. Now gone, as if they had never existed. Helga spent her day in the infirmary, though her duties had been reduced. With no clean supplies, her ability to treat minor injuries was limited. She requested fresh gauze and antiseptic, but was told the medical cabinet would remain locked until further notice. That phrase, "until further notice," echoed through the camp like a judgment without trial. She washed her hands with cold water and dried them on her uniform. It felt like 1943 again. At dinner, the atmosphere was hollow. The usual soft conversations were gone. Women chewed in silence, staring into their bowls. There was no laughter, no whispered jokes. Without hygiene, they felt their edges blur again, like they were dissolving into uniformity, into prisonerhood. Their individuality, painstakingly revived, was being eroded one layer at a time. Captain Rose returned to the barracks that evening. She stood in the doorway with a clipboard, expression unreadable. The women stared at her, unsure whether to rise, to greet, or to ignore. She read off a list of names. 10 women to be interviewed by military intelligence the next morning. No reasons given. No room for refusal. Helga's name was last on the list. That night, Helga lay awake, listening to Liesel's quiet breathing and the scratch of Anna Marie's pen. Her thoughts drifted to her old clinic in Hamburg, the sound of newborns crying, the scent of disinfectant and linen. She had worked so hard to protect life, and now she lived in a place where cleanliness was a bargaining chip. She wondered if the Americans truly understood the power they wielded when they withheld a bar of soap. The next morning, the interrogations began. The women returned shaken, their faces pale, their eyes empty. Questions were not screamed, but pressed, quietly, persistently, like pressure against a wound. They were asked about rocket programs, factories, supply routes. Most knew nothing. Some tried to explain they had been school teachers, farmers, nurses. But the officers weren't looking for truth. They were looking for value. Helga's turn came in the afternoon. She sat across from a young man in a crisp uniform who spoke German fluently. He was polite but clinical. He asked about her work in the infirmary, about the records she kept, about what she overheard. His tone was calm, but the message clear. Information buys comfort. Cooperation brings soap. Resistance brings silence. She said little, just enough to appear compliant, not enough to betray anyone. When she left the room, her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from fury. Not because they had questioned her, but because they had missed the towels.
She realized then how deeply she had come to depend on the small rituals, how they had built a bridge back to herself, and how easily that bridge had been burned. That evening, no towels arrived again. The soap was gone. The women sat in their bunks, the air heavy with sweat and unspoken grief. No one cried. They were past that. But inside each of them, something had broken again. Clean skin had been a promise. Now it was a memory. It began with a mistake. A missing file, nothing more. A junior clerk in the administration building admitted to misplacing a stack of troop movement documents behind a cabinet during a chaotic filing shift. The documents had never left the building. No espionage, no betrayal. The entire week of lockdown, interrogations, and psychological strain had been sparked by a clerical error buried under dust and silence. The news spread quickly through the ranks of officers and guards, but was not formally announced to the prisoners. Instead, the changes came subtly. The guards began speaking again, not warmly, but less cold. The medical wing reopened. Hot water returned, slowly and cautiously, to the taps. Clean towels were stacked in silence at the end of each bunk row. But for the women, it was not a cause for celebration. It was confirmation of how fragile kindness had been all along. Liesel looked at her reflection in a bowl of still water that morning. The girl staring back seemed older, not just from dirt and exhaustion, but from disillusionment. Her hair was still unbrushed. She had stopped caring. But when she touched the soft cotton towel folded neatly on her tot, her hand trembled. The towel meant something again, but not comfort. It meant survival through manipulation. Cleanliness had become a currency, and she didn't know if she could afford to believe in it again. Captain Rose returned to the barracks the next afternoon. This time she wasn't holding a clipboard. She entered slowly, hands behind her back, eyes lowered. In her grasp was a small, wrinkled object, a photograph. She walked directly to Liesel and held it out without speaking. It was the family photo confiscated during the security sweep days earlier. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke in hesitant German. "We let fear win." The silence in the room cracked. It wasn't noisy, but something loosened. The women watched as Liesel clutched the photo and held it close, her face buried in the image. Helga stood, moved to the wash basin, and poured water over her hands, watching it run over her fingers like forgiveness. The scent of soap returned faintly to the air. Someone had unwrapped a bar and passed it down the row without speaking. Anna Marie, who had said little in days, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "They took everything, then gave it back, and expected us to be grateful." Her voice wasn't bitter, just tired. But then she added, almost softly, "And still, I washed my hands." Her admission felt like both surrender and resistance at once. Captain Rose met Helga's gaze across the room. It was not the look of authority. It was a recognition between two women who had both been broken by systems larger than themselves. Helga gave a single nod, nothing more. But in that moment, the ground beneath them shifted again, not toward trust, but toward truth. That night, the towels were warm again. The showers steamed. The air inside the barracks held the faint, clean scent that had once felt like hope. But now, it smelled more like memory, something that could be taken at any time. The women moved through their routines with care, not reverence. They washed quietly. They dried their skins slowly. They did not look each other in the eye. Liesel folded her towel 3 times before setting it down. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow. She no longer believed in permanence. But for that night, the water was hot, the soap lathered, and her skin was clean. That, she thought, would have to be enough. Cleanliness was not freedom, but it was the first step toward remembering what it felt like to matter.